very much to Director Lee and to Deputy Secretary of Commerce Bruce Andrews for excellent opening remarks about the long-standing importance of licensing and the fundamental role that licensing plays in the commercialization of patent innovation throughout the American innovation economy as well as the global innovation economy. We are kicking off today's set of panels with our first panel on addressing the topic of the economic contribution of licensing to the U.S. economy. So we're starting domestically, and then once we get our sea legs domestically, then we'll kind of branch out and talk more globally. We have an excellent panel of speakers who will be talking about essentially what we do know about licensing and its contributions to the U.S. domestic economy and the driver of the innovation economy that we've all come to accept and take for granted, many of us today, as well as what we don't know and how we might go about measuring it and what type of factors and variables we'll need to look at. The order of presenters is the same order as listed in the program that you received when you registered. We'll be kicking off today with Chief Economist at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, Alan Marco, and then Brian Moyer, Director of the Bureau of Economic Analysis of the Department of Commerce, will then be speaking, followed by Jeff Whittle, who's a partner at Hogan and Lovells, and even more importantly from my perspective, given my membership in the Licensing Executive Society, chairman of the Licensing Executive Society of the USA and Canada, and then last but certainly not least, Becky Fraser, who's Director of Government Affairs at Qualcomm, which plays a major role in licensing in the modern high-tech economy. Our structure for our panel as a kickoff panel will be that each of the speakers will speak for about 7 to 9 minutes. I will be time master, and I will stick I will keep very strict to it with my handy-dandy iPhone, and thanks to licensing. And then we will have time for question and answer between and among the panelists as well as with the audience. Why don't we start with Brian first, and then we'll shift over to Alan. So without much further ado, Brian, and I will keep the time and.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. So I'm the director at the Bureau of Economic Analysis. We're going to turn to the question now, what kind of statistics do we have on licensing? And how do those statistics show up in the sets of national and international accounts produced by the federal government? And we'll hopefully through this discussion, highlight a few trends related to licensing activities. So, at first pass, you might think, let's look at the contribution of licensing to GDP. You might think that would be a reasonable way to start thinking about this problem. But it turns out, as you probably are aware, licensing is often an intermediate purchase in the production of other goods and services. It's not a final product. So it doesn't show up in many cases in our measures of GDP. So what we have to do is look beyond the basic set of GDP accounts. We need to look at a broader set of accounts. So, for example, we'll look at our industry accounts that show the transactions between industries and the production of output. We'll look at our international transactions accounts, balance of payments accounts, foreign direct investment accounts that show in very detail the imports and exports of licensing-related services. So, let's get started with the industry accounts. If we look at our industry accounts, we can track a measure of licensing related output. So you can think of this as sales by firms of licenses. And you can see that this trend has increased steadily over the last 2 decades or so, starting at about 50 billion back in 1997 and having increased to about 140 billion by the time we get to 2014. And you see only a slight dip there in this trend upward, which is the Great Recession in 2009. If you ask yourself what industries are contributing to that increase, or to those growth rates over time, it's actually pretty interesting. You see 4 primary industries that contribute to those increases, and that is first of all is the motion picture and sound recording industry, shown here in blue, followed by the broadcasting and telecommunications, shown in green, publishing, which includes software publishing, shown in red, and then finally miscellaneous professional, scientific, and technical services, basically business services, shown here in purple. And I think intuitively this makes good sense. These are the industries that you would think of as producing a large amount of licensing services. So now you can ask the next question: what industries use these licenses in the production of their outputs of goods and services? And it turns out that most of the industries that do this, or the majority of the industries that do this, are classified in the information sector. And again, that's not terribly surprising. The industry that uses the most licensing output in its production of further output is the broadcasting and telecommunications industry. And that's shown here in green in this chart. And that's followed by the publishing industry, again, including software, shown in red, and the motion pictures industry, shown in blue. Now, the one thing I should point out that, and you know, we've got to be a little aware when we look at these various economic statistics, given the conventions of some of the national accounting principles, this set of licenses here does not include prepackaged software licenses, because prepackaged software licenses are actually counted as investment in the national income and product account. So it's not showing up here as an element. And of course, that's very important aspect of licensing activity. Okay, now let's turn to our international accounts and see how licensing shows up in our balance of payments accounts. It basically shows up in the category called charges for the use of intellectual property. And it turns out that net exports of licensing is a tremendous contributor to the U.S. trade surplus in services, accounting for about 40%, as Deputy Secretary Andrews just mentioned, about 40% of the total services surplus in 2015. You can see that net exports of licensing have grown steadily over time, reaching a level of about $90 billion by 2014. And again, pretty steady increase, with the exception of the Great Recession in 2009. If we look at net exports of licensing by type, we see this is led by the computer software products, followed by industrial processes, audiovisual products, trademarks, and franchisee fees. And again, these are sort of the common sense type of exports products that you would think would comprise this category. If we look at this by geography, net exports of licensing to Europe, Asia, and the Pacific are the largest trade flows, followed by net exports to North America, Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. And if you focus in on China, licensing exports to China are about 6.8 billion, while the licensing imports are about 0.3 billion. Now, the final point I'd like to make is to see what we can learn about licensing related issues by looking at our foreign direct investment data. And so I want to answer the question, or think about the question, do foreign firms seek to obtain advanced U.S. technologies by acquiring U.S. businesses? And we can get some insight to this by looking at our foreign direct investment data. So the question here is, do instead of purchasing licenses, do foreign firms just basically acquire U.S. businesses to obtain that information? So when we look at the data, we see that most foreign direct investment in the United States is not in advanced industries. So what this chart shows here is the percentage of employment in advanced industries versus all other industries for foreign-owned U.S. businesses. So the advanced industries are shown, the share of the advanced industries here is shown in red, while the share of the all other industries is shown in blue. And you can see that the percent of advanced industries is significantly less than the share of all other industries. And this seems to hold across it certainly holds for the all countries aggregate, and it seems to hold across at least all the countries shown here on this slide. Also, this research, answering this question more broadly, there does seem to be some literature out there that suggests that even when the foreign direct investment in the U.S. is in advanced industries, foreign investors must bring a certain sort of minimal level of technological capability in order to benefit from U.S. high-tech innovations. So this was a very quick run-through of some of the statistics that are available at the Bureau of Economic Analysis and from other sources. Clearly, there's a lot more detail we could go into. We're very happy to work with all of you if you have specific questions or answering specific research questions. We'd be more than pleased to share our knowledge with you and help you walk through the various sets of economic accounts. So, thank you.
Wow, it's very impressive, both in terms of the data and actually exactly on time.
There we go.
By 1 second. All right. So that was fascinating data, and now Alan will provide a framework, I think, on the economic framework for understanding what that data represents and where we can apply it in our understanding of economy.
Right, thank you. And just even as the slides are going up there, again, I apologize for I think it was entirely my fault sending the wrong slides this morning. It was licensing related. So again, I want to think about a simple economic framework. I want to think about licenses in their simplest terms, which are an agreement on a price, let's say. There are lots of other terms in licensing agreements potentially, but I want to think about an agreement on a price. I'm going to be thinking mostly about patent licensing here. And that looks right, because that was my first slide that I was expecting. I want to think primarily about prices. So in terms of thinking about prices, I want to think about a particular example, just a simple numerical example, and walk through this with just physical property. Let's say a 1972 Ferrari Dino. So suppose that we've got a buyer and a seller here for this 1972 Ferrari Dino, Brad and Angelina. I've been using Brad and Angelina as my buyer and seller for a long time, although I've been using this example for so long that it used to be Brad and Jennifer. So Brad already owns this car, right? He's holding on to it. Angelina's this potential buyer in this market. It's a very small economy. Maybe they're stranded on a desert island. There's Brad, Angelina, and a 1972 Ferrari Dino. Clearly, this car is worth less to Brad than it is to Angelina. For some reason, she values it at $80,000. Brad values it at $40,000. The key thing here, and this, by the way, should blow your mind, even if you're a PhD economist, this fundamental truth should blow your mind. When Brad sells the car to Angelina, suppose they agree on a fair price, whatever that is. Let's suppose it's $60,000. They split the difference here. They transact at $60,000. Now, Brad has gained $20,000, right? He has $60,000 and used to have something that was worth $40,000. He's up by $20,000. Angelina is also up by $20,000. She gains a car that's worth $80,000 to her, and she gave up $60,000 to pay for it. She's also up by $20,000. You notice what happened here. This is what should blow your mind. Nothing happened. Nothing changed, right? Nothing was produced. The car was already there. It was owned by Brad. Now we've taken that car from Brad, given it to Angelina, and we've created $40,000 worth of surplus in this little economy just by taking it from one party and giving it to another. Just by taking it from one party and giving it to another. That's what voluntary trade is about. That's what economic surplus is about, and that's why economists get really excited about these sorts of transactions. And when I'm teaching, I'm jumping up and down saying, "This is the magic. This is where the magic happens." Right? It's just that transaction. So, what does price have to do with that? Nothing. Price has nothing to do with that. Prices don't matter. So why does the price not matter? Because any price that they transact on creates the same amount of surplus, creates $40,000 worth of surplus. The surplus is generated by getting the car and taking it from Brad and giving it to Angelina. That's what generates the surplus. The price has nothing to do with the surplus. In fact, it's even worse than that. So any price that they bargain over, right, and whoever has more bargaining power is going to get more of that surplus. right? But any price that they bargain over will generate the same surplus. Just depends on who gets more of it. Worse, if Angelina were to steal the car, we would generate the exact same amount of surplus. If she steals the car, we still, from an economist standpoint, in its extreme form, we generate the exact same amount of surplus with theft. Or planned economy. So we have some benevolent social planner who comes in and takes the car from Brad and gives it to Angelina. We generate the same surplus. So prices don't matter. If prices don't matter, you might think licensing doesn't matter. So this is the point where usually someone snaps a picture and tweets, and this is what goes out or gets emailed to my boss, is the chief economist sitting in front of something that says licensing doesn't matter, and then the emails start firing away, and by the time I sit down, I have an entire email thread devoted to this. So let me say this. The prices don't matter as long as the deal gets done, right? As long as the transaction happens and we get the car from Brad to Angelina, that's what matters. In that case, the prices don't matter, as long as the deal gets done. But economists rely on the price signal to get the transaction done, to get the deal done, right? So we rely on the price signal to get it right. So prices are actually everything, right? They're nothing in terms of calculating that surplus, but they're everything as far as ensuring that we get that surplus, right? So getting the prices right really matters. Now, prices are, so what if we set the price at 20,000, for instance, in this little economy, the deal won't get done. Brad won't sell it for 20,000. Angelina will be willing to buy it, but Brad won't sell it. If we set the price of gas at 0, then Angelina is not going to find anyone who's willing to sell her gas. So the prices, in fact, ensure that these deals get done as long as the prices reflect the true kind of market values. So prices, any market can be subject to market failure. Patents themselves are a solution to a market failure. So we've created these patent rights to sort of to solve that initial market failure that once we've created something and we're willing to license it, if we don't have a property right over it, people can just steal that. And it creates a disincentive. So these patents are a solution to a market failure. So I just would add that it's a little disingenuous for rights holders to suggest that we shouldn't consider other market failures in these markets when we're talking about markets related to patents or other kinds of government-defined property rights. It's a little bit like saying government hands off my Medicare. But that said, we still want to, whenever possible, rely on these market signals. And to create policies so that these market signals reflect the worth of the underlying assets or the underlying goods and services. So good policy, right, will reduce the transaction costs of the willing buyers and sellers being able to find each other. They're going to increase the flow of information so that we know how much these things are worth and we can accurately value them. So that's good policy, and then we can rely on this market signal of price. So why do we care then about the prices aside from just the signal value? Well, they tell us a lot about what's going on in these transactions, and this is information that Brian is related to what Brian was telling us about. So we've got these inputs, right? These factors of production, as economists would call them. They go into the production of, let's say, some intermediate goods. These could be the components that we use in technology to create a mobile device. And then we put all these components together to create some output. Now, not all of this is done through licensing. So some of these intermediate goods may be purchased by the end producer, and some of them may be created themselves, all right, in their own manufacturing processes. So licensing is part of the whole production process, but certainly not all of it. There's technology use as well as from their own ownership and their own property rights. So licensing helps us to understand the contribution of these, but it's not all of it, right? So we need to think of licensing in terms of the whole supply chain. So here, when we look at licensing, it helps us to decompose this total value, right, this total surplus that we were talking about, this $40,000, into its component parts. How much is going to high tech, how much is going to low tech, how much is going to labor, how much is going to capital, how much is going to certain innovators in certain areas. And that helps us to see where we're growing in the economy, and where our manufacturing and our goods and services and the higher quality goods and services are coming from. So it helps us to understand that. It helps us understand this contribution of factors of production. It gives us, it helps to understand the incentives for research and development by looking at these markets for technology. Incentivizes commercialization. And it, again, facilitates this market for technology. It creates a situation where it's easier to go out in the marketplace and trade with somebody and gain from the specialization that different producers have. So we can see more specialization and more gains from trade from that. And within this market for technology, by facilitating that and reducing the transaction cost for that, that facilitates knowledge flow, because most, certainly a lot of technology deals involve some sort of transfer of know-how. So in survey results show this, and I won't go into any data on that, but some really good surveys have shown the amount of know-how that's incorporated in different kind of licensing agreements. And we also can look at both supplier and customer initiated innovation, right? Through a licensing agreement, you can oftentimes see a feedback effect from the customers and innovation, and that knowledge flow goes both directions. And I am 10 seconds over, but pretty close.
Yes, and that was well worth it for the PowerPoint. Just to hear you become an advocacy for theft, and announcing that prices and licenses don't matter.
That's what I said. That's right.
Went immediately out. All right, that was an excellent overview of kind of the data, the framework, economic framework for understanding licensing. Now we'll hear some of on the ground from people who are actually doing licensing and are making the between and among the firms that are producing and creating this.
Thank you, Adam. Here we go. Thank you, Adam. Is that on? Yeah. Thank you, Adam and Alan and Brian. Very good. I'm privileged to be on this distinguished panel. What I do is I am a practitioner, as Adam mentioned. So I practice licensing as my day job. I've been doing it for almost 25 years. I can remember doing my first licensing agreement in 1992 for a medical device to a major medical device company at the time, and that license lasted for a decade plus, so real economic benefits. I'm also privileged to be the chairman of LES. What I'm most disappointed in is in my 25 years experience, and then during my service as the chairman, I still don't have a Ferrari, as Alan mentioned. So I'm looking forward to the day. I still got another 25 years, hopefully, to negotiate on the Ferrari there. So thank you. I've also had the privilege of traveling to the locations that Brian mentioned in his slides to meet with LES executives throughout the world. So I not only traveled the United States, but also traveled the world to meet with licensing executives. What LES is kind of, as the slide mentions, it's kind of the IP business bridge. It takes the technology side of patents or other technology, intellectual assets or intellectual capital, and transfers it or licenses it to other entities, similar to Becky's company on the end there, and they're very significant in that. Licensing Executive Society is made up of primarily business executives and some legal executives in the society as a whole. So I just returned from a trip to Asia and the Middle East. What LES does is not only make connections and networking for executives in this group or this network, but it also provides education on kind of the how-tos to do the licensing and licensing transfer. We put on courses, and I just finished a week course in the Middle East trying to teach executives there about licensing. And they came from not only the Middle East, but other parts of the world as well for the conference. And that's what Licensing Executive Society does. We'll have another educational program in D.C. later in June as well, but I'm not here really to tout LES per se, but I just want to give you a background on who LES is. If you want connections to get into the licensing world or for educational purposes, in addition to forums that are outstanding like here at the USPTO. The LES has had a close relationship with the USPTO over the years. We recently had a spring meeting in Houston. We had Hope Simabuku, who's the director of the Dallas USPTO, was one of our keynote speakers, and a couple of executives from USPTO is also there speaking on different events. What I want to say is that the state of licensing as an economic contribution, in a lot of ways, when you say patents to the consumer public today, it appears to be a threat or a bad view of some kind, or like the mafia in some sorts. So it's really not that at all, actually. But that's sometimes their perception. And so as the Licensing Executive Society, we want to help change that perception and help move that perception into a positive direction. We not only try to advocate for public policy change, but also for standards, and I want to talk briefly about that as well. We're very strong advocates for a strong patent system. We think it adds economic value and creates jobs for the country, nationally and internationally. We like to advocate for well-informed judges, provide education for judges, and promote patent understanding, intellectual asset and capital understanding. We also like for effective federal legislation that enhances and incentivizes, as Director Lee mentioned, the innovation economy. We like licensing, and we think tech transfer is significant in that regard, and that's what we're about promoting. One of the big changes to do this, and when we try to educate Congress on these issues, is that LES is advocating for standards in the licensing arena to add some normality and goodwill in the licensing community. Standards in service and licensing are performed in other areas of our society from a quality perspective, such as ISO 9000 and other standards in the country and in the world. And what licensing standards are is they're a little different than standard essential patent licensing. Although it's related, that's not what we're really about promoting per se. LES standards will be ANSI-based standards and focus on these 4 or 5 main areas to start with, which are creating norms and best practices around patent licensing, IP and supply chain, IP brokerage, valuation, and board compliance. So we've had buy-in already at significant levels for this. We have committees that are actively working on this. LES leadership and committee chairs will be going through ANSI training to allow broad and open participation for licensing standards. And I don't want to go into each of these in detail, but these are some of the more detailed nuances for the standards, and everyone in this audience can participate in these standards. It's a low barrier for participation with a lot of benefits, and I encourage you to consider that. Our view at LES, it's time for the private sector to lead a little bit more. Initiate and maintain best practices and standards, implement high ethical behavior in licensing, and emphasize certification for licensing knowledge, such as the Certified Licensing Professional exam or certification levels. Henry Wixson, who's the General Counsel of NIST, was a recent teacher in one of these courses for the CLP as well, review courses. We also like to educate judges in the legislative and executive branches. We want to focus primarily on emphasizing to legislature and judges and the executive branch to not squelch but maintain and continue to create this robust innovation economy. So what do I see as trends from a practitioner from an economics perspective? When I travel and I talk, the United States still leads the world in technology, commercialization, and licensing. It's the leader. There's a website, and if you want to grab me or send me an email later, I'll connect you to it. But it's a website, for example. When I speak and I talk in other countries, I've had people say, well, why do you invite this guy from the United States down to teach us about licensing or commercialization? and they show them this website, and this website, you can enter data or information, and it can say, for example, poverty on a global map, and it will increase the size of the country where poverty is the greatest. If you enter technology commercialization in this program, the United States swallows the globe. We're the leader in technology commercialization. We know how to do it, and we know how to do it best, and it's a big driver, as mentioned, in a lot of our economy. But I tell you that the global economy is getting more educated and savvy about the value of intellectual property and technology. Particularly Europe has not been far behind, as Brian mentioned in his slides. But Asia is coming along really fast. And as mentioned, I was just in Beijing for a week talking to the executives there about it and involved in issues related to that. And they're becoming more competitive and more aggressive. And to me, that's a positive thing. That's not a threat to me, and shouldn't be a threat to you in the sense that it creates an economic engine and drives change negotiations. In licensing, we'd much rather be on the other side of somebody that's a knowledgeable negotiator in this field, because it makes the deals and the relationships go much smoother and faster, and you get a higher quality product in the end. So, but we've also seen both rising industrial and developing economies are hungry for more intellectual property, technology, and licensing education. They're hungry for it. They want people to teach them how, and they want people to really grow. I can tell you that I was in Mexico. I was at a program, in Quebec City in Quebec recently, and there was an executive from Mexico who was in a licensing class several years ago. And these type of programs change their government and their standards, and their university changes to what their practices are in those departments. And so that's why it's important to have programs like this and programs to promote and to understand licensing more effectively. The demand is still high for intellectual capital. There's also trends in the significance of building patent portfolio around the world, more of a broader platform, and perhaps some people will get into that in more detail today, over the last 4 to 5 years as changes have occurred. Licenses and acquirers want depth and strength in the number and strong claims from a patent perspective, and there's an unprecedented amount of knowledge of prior art now, which impacts licensing significantly in terms of increasing the quality of the patent and the license or the technology transfer in general. With that, I'm finished. So thank you for your patience with all that, and thank you for your time, Adam.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Good morning, everyone. My name is Becky Fraser, and I am with Qualcomm. I'd like to start by thanking the George Mason University team and the team here at PTO for convening today. Also would like to recognize my colleague Lori Self in the audience, who has been working with the George Mason and PTO teams on this program, and both of us would be happy to answer any questions that may arise during this presentation. So my role on the panel this morning is to provide a company-specific case study of our experiencing licensing technology. For those of you who may not know Qualcomm, we are a wireless communications engineering company. We were founded in San Diego, California in 1985, and over the course of these 30 years, we have played an integral role in the mobile communications revolution. So we are at the heart of many of your smartphones. Certainly the technology that we have helped to bring to market has had a very meaningful impact on people and consumers and businesses around the world. We were started by 7 founders who came together with the goal of creating quality communications, and they created Qualcomm. Part of the revolutionary idea that our founder, Dr. Irwin Jacobs, had in 1985 was that someday everyone would have a phone number. And obviously, we have surpassed that, as many of us now possess more than one phone number. So as a technology enabler for the across the mobile ecosystem. You want me to go up there? I'll just turn the slides up there.
No problem.
No, Larry, you can have a seat. I got it. No worries. I'm happy to.
It was working. I think Jeff broke it.
Yeah. You give the technology company the clicker and watch out what happens. A quick mention here. At Qualcomm, as a technology enabler, we license our technology across the mobile value chain. And our business model has many advantages for the wireless industry. And this is a depiction as to how it works, right? So Qualcomm invests heavily in research and development of core mobile technologies. Through licensing arrangements, we provide the innovative solutions to wireless ecosystem stakeholders who integrate the technology into advanced devices and services, bringing them into subscriber base, consumers, businesses. The revenue from that feeds back into the ecosystem, and Qualcomm takes a percentage of that, and we put that back into our research and development, pushing the boundaries of technology as we know it today. So there's a lot of benefits to this licensing model. It enables new players to join the system by licensing technology. New companies can become key players, and we've certainly seen a rapid evolution of this in the mobile space with new entrants. And this obviously creates a more competitive marketplace. So to take, I fully appreciated Brian's comments earlier about the challenges of quantifying licensing, since it is very difficult to do, which is why we're applauding this gathering today. But as a technology company, we were obviously very interested in collecting some data about the economic contribution of Qualcomm. And so the way that we did that was we partnered with the Boston Consulting Group, who put together a study which was produced in 2015, which quantified the economic impact of the mobile sector in 6 different economies, the U.S. being one of them. And not surprisingly, the statistics were very illuminating. As we all know, but very interesting to have right in front of us quantified, but mobile is the fastest adopted technology of all time. So we have embraced this revolution faster than we have adopted any other technology. And that has fueled economic growth in multiple countries. And to provide a couple of U.S. examples, the mobile sector contributes 3.2% of the U.S. GDP, which is about $54 billion in 2014. And the mobile sector is on track to contribute about 5% to the U.S. GDP by 2020. And the mobile value chain is directly responsible for about 1 million U.S. jobs. And really core to the mobile sector is the licensing of core technology. It's been essential to the rapid and cost-effective advancement of this sector. It is clear and cooperative licensing arrangements that have made it possible for companies across the value chain to access the most advanced technologies, which has direct benefits for consumers and companies. And so it's through effective industry-driven collaborations to solve the technical problems, the R&D relationships that we have, the efforts to set standards which are integral to the telecommunications sector, and the licensing of IP that have been key enablers for this mobile revolution. And we were so delighted to see Brian's Bureau of Economic Analysis produce some quantifiable data in 2014 that put a measurement on the U.S. export of licensed technology at $130 billion, and the import into the United States about $42 billion. This is a measurable impact to the U.S. economy. So these are some statistics that we've looked at for the United States and our sector of mobile. To take it another layer deeper, looking at the economic contribution of licensing, which again is a large part of Qualcomm's revenue, we also looked at San Diego, California, where we're headquartered, to quantify the economic impact of our business locally. And not surprising, the numbers were very significant. So Qualcomm, as a large technology licensor in the mobile telecommunications space, adds about $4.5 billion in direct and indirect economic activity in our headquartered city. For every job that Qualcomm generates, there is a ripple effect of the generation of about 2.3 jobs in the greater San Diego area. So direct impact to the larger community, which obviously isn't usually mentioned when looking at licensing quantification. While you are all here in the building today, I would highly encourage you to visit the Hall of Fame, right? The Inventors Hall of Fame. One of the exhibits there is this app, the Wireless Technology Family Tree. And while everybody here is interested in quantification, not sure what I'm doing there, quantification of licensing to the U.S. economy, many other stakeholders are interested in anecdotes and illustrations of how. All right. So I was hoping to connect to the internet here. This slide is an interactive tool that looks at, across the bottom here, these small blue and yellow boxes are examples of patents that Qualcomm has filed here at the PTO. And this family tree then extends up to 5 fictional characters: a banker, a congressional Hill legislative aide, a farmer, a student, and a engineer. And you can connect these different people with patents. So how the Qualcomm patents in the phone that they use are, all of the different applications that they're using, connecting it right back to specific patents and the licensing system of which we are a part of. So it's a really illustrative tool which is available online and again is here in the Hall of Fame if you want to interact with it that way, which just demonstrates again, maybe not the quantitative impact of licensing, but very much the anecdotal and the personal aspects of how we've all benefited from the licensing of wireless communications technology that Qualcomm has patented. So thank you. Look forward to your questions.
So we do have about 10 minutes left for panels. We have time for we have time for questions and answers from the audience. There's mics actually, so why don't you stand up to the mic so that can you see the mic? Yes, the microphones. So if people can just come up to the microphones and I'll go back and forth between the questioners. All right. Yes, Kevin.
Keith Mallinson, Wise Harbor. The figure of 130 billion sounds like a pretty big number. And so the net figure as well, which was, I guess, about 88. But in comparison to the U.S. economy, which I think is about 18 trillion or so, that actually is a relatively small percentage, significantly less than 1%. Okay? So it's still a good number, but I wonder, actually, though, whether the figure is actually underrepresenting what really happens with IP licensing. When you're looking at the national accounts or the international accounts, you look at the trade flows, everything is revenue-based, and you compare them on that basis. But, for example, if one's comparing a manufacturing-oriented business, let's say we offshore manufacturing of electronic products, that can be quite low-margin business in comparison to patent and intellectual property licensing, which can be actually very high margin. So, I mean, are we underrepresenting what is really going on here? And I say this with background of the idea, for example, I think Donald Trump would like to bring manufacturing of iPhones back to the United States. Maybe there's some desirability in that, but really, maybe the point is being missed, that actually there's much more real value or income coming in licensing than would be apparent merely by comparing gross figures of trade. It's probably I would think Brian or Alan would be my targets for these questions.
I just want to actually add one other example to that. I do think it's underrepresented because I think it's difficult for us to actually get all the data, but Brian would be more of an expert on that than I am. But I would want to mention also cross-licensing. So in cross-licensing, oftentimes there's not even a particular value, right, that's associated with it in accounting, and in some industries that is the most significant form of licensing. So I think it's certainly underrepresented in the national accounts. The extent to which it is, I think is well, it's anyone's guess. It'd be more Brian's guess than mine, more BEA's guess than ours.
Yeah, and I'm not going to venture a guess there. No, I would say that it probably is underrepresented. I think that for all the reasons that have been pointed out. And I will say that we have a significant research effort underway to measure not only licensing but IP flows in general. We're sort of undertaking an effort to better measure the digital economy, trade flows, as well as domestic production. So that's an effort that's underway.
I would agree with Brian. I think Brian's analysis it's very difficult to get the data. And I think he's done an outstanding job in getting the data. I think that's at least a minimum level, and I think it is underrepresented. I think there are greater economies going on in our country and impacted by that.
I actually wanted to pick up on Keith's question a little bit, because I was actually surprised to hear that you don't account for prepackaged software licenses as licenses. Instead, you count it as investments, whereas my understanding is that most software licensing is prepackaged licensing, right? And in fact, most software patent licensing is portfolio licensing. Would that be included within the category of prepackaged licenses as well? And if so, then that's a massive area of economic activity that we're not measuring or accounting for, at least as licensing activity.
So yeah, no, I think okay. So this is more about what pot it lands in, right? So this is it's certainly accounted for. It's just there are these sets of international guidelines out there that say, to all the countries of the world, here's how you put together your sets of national accounts. And there was a very debated issue over licensing of prepackaged software, and should that be counted as business investment, or should it be counted as an intermediate expense? Even for very short-term licenses, like let's say 6 months or a year. And at the end of the day, the international bodies decided that would be counted as business investment. So it's not that it's missed. It's just that it shows up in the investment component of GDP rather than as an intermediate charge in the production process, as Alan was describing when you were talking about the intermediate purchases.
Does the study of GDP of the investment component, is it granular enough to account for the prepackaged license?
Yes.
Software licenses?
Yes. I mean, okay. It's at least in an economic census year. Okay. Not necessarily on an every year basis or an every quarter basis, but yes, we have enough information about that, about the prepackaged licenses for an economic census year, so it's embodied.
Right. Yeah. Yes, another question.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Jim Harlan. I'm a director of competition and standards policy at InterDigital. My question is actually a follow-up to something that Alan said. You had mentioned, and given this is like the economic impact of licensing sort of academy, you had mentioned that patents are a solution to market failure. I'm wondering if you can expand on that from just an economist perspective, because I'm a patent attorney at core, and it's sort of contrary to my understanding. And I'd like to sort of hear your interpretation of what that exactly means.
Sure. And in fact, it was in the other slides that I almost showed. Without it, I mean, really, it was a created, a patent right, a created right, right? And so without patent rights, it's one example you can use is Arrow's paradox, right? So if you have invention, say a new process for producing something, and it would be valuable for other firms to use as well as yourself, you can go and tell them that. To sell you this process so that you can use it too, and they say, well, I'm not sure how much I'm willing to pay for it. Tell me what it is. You tell them what it is. They say, I'm not in the market, and then they can go ahead and use the process anyway if there is no way to protect that, if there's no patent right over that technology. So the market failure there is that once I've created this, it's easy to copy and easy to share, and thus I don't have the incentive to invest in the creation of it to begin with. So there's an inefficient incentive to invest in the R&D. And so patents are one potential solution for that. Copyrights, other forms of intellectual property are similar in that regard. They enable us to transact on giving away the farm just by telling people about it. So it's really the market failure there is that once I tell people, I can't exclude them from using it without some sort of enforceable right.
Yes.
Hi, Kate Vincent from the IPC. Thank you for these great presentations. I wonder if you could tell us a little about the relative importance of trade secrets and patents in a technology licensing situation. And I know it's hard to speak to that in the abstract. So are there databases that you all look to that give us a sense in transactions what kind of technology is being transferred?
Well, I could tell you that the significance of them is massive on the trade secret side. I think there's some pretty significant arguments that over the last 4 or 5 years, the benefits and strengths of trade secrets has really grown. The examples in industry is that trade secrets are very big in any manufacturing, any chemical processing. And primarily it's the trade secrets and know-how that's licensed in those situations. I think what you have from a practical point of view from the patent system is you get a lot more bundling of rights. By bundling trade secrets and know-how in the actual license agreement, you can actually have the life of the license agreement extend beyond the life of the patents, as long as there's some kind of change when the patents expire, either a drop in royalty or some other adjustment in that sense. But there's a lot more bundling going on in license agreements in general from my experience and what I've seen kind of nationally and internationally.
It's a great question, Kate. And from a Qualcomm perspective, trade secrets are very critical to our semiconductor business. So I spoke earlier about the wireless intellectual property that we have, but we also are a fabless semiconductor company, and trade secrets are intertwined in the licensing and IP arrangements that we have in our semiconductor business. And there are a couple, as Jeff noted, the trade secrets discussion has been vibrant in recent years, not only domestically but also internationally. And I think that there is definitely more information. Some of our trade associations have been working in particular to highlight the role of trade secrets and the importance of strengthening it. I'm not directly familiar with your question regarding kind of how to measure, but certainly happy to think through it. But just wanted to introduce that in addition to chemicals, it's also very important for the semiconductor sector.
There are some private database groups like KT Mine and things like that that also you can get that data from that have example license agreements and things like that that will adjust and specifically address know-how and trade secrets in those aspects.
So I have a question for
And I don't have any stock in KT Mine or anything like
that. In the licensing agreements that you're familiar with, how often is the technology, is it even separated? So the ones that I'm with, it's oftentimes just we're licensing this technology. And there may be some explicit exchange of know-how in that, but sometimes not separated explicitly between trade secrets and patents. Is that your experience?
Well, that happens in some instances, but often some of the larger patent license agreements require, or the parties require, the listing of the patents at the time as an exhibit or schedule off of the agreement to kind of identify them. There's some benefits from doing that. Even if the agreement is held confidential, you do it in a confidential way, there's some benefits in separately identifying that. Some countries in the world require recording of licenses, and so that's a significant issue, and you got to be able to identify them, and they also look for tracking on when those expire. So because of that, if you're looking for that drop down or change in royalty arrangement or some other change, as those patents expire, you need to be able to know when they expire and be able to identify them and roll off patents. Sometimes if it's a bundle where it's may not include patents in the bundle. It may just be know-how and trade secrets in the bundle and that sort.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. Since we had the technical difficulties, I would like to maybe just take 30 seconds to let maybe one last question and just cut our break down short by a couple of minutes, just because we had all the technical difficulties. So, yes, one last question.
I'm Paul Morinville with U.S. Inventor, and so a patent is an exclusive right, but Qualcomm licenses those out to others, and my assumption is that others build upon those. Has there been any analysis? I got two questions. Has there been any analysis on what is the multiplying effect of that as other companies build upon Qualcomm's stuff? And then on the inverse of that, we're talking about trade secrets. Does that effect go away when you start hiding them in data centers?
That's a great question. I can't speak to the existence of such analysis, but that is in part, why we looked at quantifying the economic impact of the mobile telecommunications sector, because we did want to capture not only our intellectual property contribution, but also that of so many companies that we've partnered with. And it absolutely is an integrated, built-upon network, as you've just described it. And there is the active cross-licensing, where in the telecommunications space we very much need each other's technology and do build upon the expertise that other companies bring to the table. But I'm not familiar with quantifiable data that talks about kind of a root patent and then what's built upon that. I would certainly encourage you to take a look at the app that is at the end of my deck there, that at least does talk about kind of how patents, individual patents in the phone have contributed to the different technology that we all use in the applications.
Well, thank you. I think that's a great question and a great answer to close out our panel on, the issue that needs to be further explored and to be further measured by our economists in the room. So get to it. Thank you very much for a great kickoff panel, and we will now take a short break before we start the second panel of the day. Thank you. Thank you to the panelists.